Moscow has welcomed the revision of the national security strategy by U.S. President Donald Trump's administration, where Russia is not mentioned as a direct threat. U.S. national security strategies have labeled Russia as a major threat since Moscow's 2014 annexation of Crimea and its 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine. However, on Friday, the updated U.S. policy adopted a softer tone and urged limited cooperation. The new U.S. strategy document said that the U.S. would seek a quick resolution on Russia's war in Ukraine as it aimed to re-establish strategic stability with Moscow. However, it still maintained that Russia's actions in Ukraine remained a central security concern. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov called it a positive step. He added that Russia would examine the documents in the coming days to draw out a broader conclusion. The apparent softening of tone on Russia comes as news strategy mentioned that Trump's foreign policy vision is going one of flexible realism. The 29-page statement said that the U.S. policy from now will be defined by what works for America above all, or, in two words, America first. President Trump has often made positive and admiring comments about Russian President Putin, prompting critics to accuse him of being soft on Moscow. Washington's European allies have voiced concern that softer U.S. language might weaken efforts to confront Moscow as the war in Ukraine continues. But the alliance has still held so far.
Europe has been underestimating its own power towards Russia, for example. I mean, we should be more self-confident, that's for sure. And, you know, U.S. is still our biggest ally. And there, I read it as well, that we are still the biggest ally, and it's in the interest of the United States as well that Europe lasts, and that we are really still the ally and working together for these things. I think we haven't always seen eye to eye on different topics, but I think the overall principle is still there. We are the biggest allies and we should stick together.
The new U.S. strategy may bring more worries for Europe, especially Trump's NATO allies. The updated U.S. national security strategy shows that for the Trump administration's Europe is less of a defense priority. Despite the threat posed by Russia, the NSS indicates that it expects Europe to take care of its own defense and that there will be no more NATO expansion. This means no NATO membership for Ukraine. Notably, the strategy also calls for direct intervention in the democratic politics of European nations. It said that Washington will champion opponents to European Union-led values, including on immigration. While giving a call to revive European nationalism, it states that U.S. policy should prioritize cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. This would be not acceptable to most European nations.
The United States of America is and remains our most important ally in the alliance. However, this alliance focuses on addressing political and security issues. Of course, it is also an alliance based on shared values, which means that other issues can also be discussed, but I believe that issues such as freedom of expression or the organization of our free societies here, at least in Germany, do not belong in this context. Nor do we believe that anyone needs to give us advice on these matters. They are regulated by our constitutional order.
Which poses a question: is NSS just a document or the future roadmap of Trump administration? If U.S. act to implement the strategy, it is set to cause friction with its European and NATO allies. And joining us live from Wicklow, Ireland, is Mr. Scott Lucas. Is a professor of international politics, Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Professor, thank you very much for your time. First of all, what do you make of US's policy of appeasement towards Russia?
Well, I think the what you call appeasement of Russia is part of a wider vision of the Trump administration, which does not see Russia as a threat, despite the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which is entering the 5th year. It actually sees the European Union and European nations as the threat. It is striking that this is not really a strategy as such. This isn't really a global approach to geopolitics in the way that previous strategies have been since the start of the Cold War. This does two things which benefit Russia. One is this is a Trump-first policy of seeking profits, including business deals, which would include Moscow. And secondly, this is a simplistic far-right ideology, which tries to promote far-right parties in Europe by pushing, for example, anti-immigrant lines, including the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, that civilizations are being overrun because white populations are being overrun by non-white migrants of different races and different religions. And it's not just Europe as a threat. I should also mention that other parts of the world, other countries, are simply ignored, that there is no mention of alliance. And that includes India. The entire section on Asia has zero references to alliance with India, or indeed to any other type of political or economic dynamic between the US and India.
Professor, where does this leave Europe and NATO allies? Because as it looks, they are not pleased with the document, they are not pleased with this policy. So where does it leave this major powers, including the NATO?
Well, on the immediate issue, both of Europe and of NATO, you have to try to find the adults in the room in the Trump administration. The people behind this document clearly see no future with NATO, see no future with the European Union, or indeed with any other multilateral alliances, including, for example, the Quad, because they will talk about each nation must be in it for itself. But there are others in the Trump administration who we know who are holding out against the appeasement of Russia and are demanding that you support Ukraine against the Russian invasion. And those include the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But on a wider level, I think what it means for Europe, what it means for Asia, what it means for Latin America is you can no longer count on the United States as being the force that will provide for your security. The idea of that world order since 1945 with the US at the head of it, that is gone. And so I think that means for Europe, you have to look at the European Union and at NATO becoming self-reliant. And I think that's true of other parts of the world as well. I think that's true of India as it tries to negotiate, as we saw this week, as it tries to negotiate its position between Russia and China and the United States. You cannot count on the Trump administration as being an ally if you get into trouble.
All right. Professor Scott Lucas, it's good to see you. We'll have to end it there. Thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you.